Okay, so we've done this a couple times before, and we're going to have the same thing this time. As you take the notes and you listen to me explaining, feel free to pause, rewind, or rewatch any scenes or parts that you didn't really understand. For this lesson, you guys are going to be setting up Cornell Notes, which you should already know how to set up at this point since we use it in our class, and most of you use it in your other classes as well. So now would be a good time to pause, set up your Cornell Notes, and title it The United States Constitution. Now that you have set it up, we're going to get started. Our learning goal for this particular lesson, if you're a 3, that's really our goal. It's you understand why the Constitution is important and you know what it does and how it was created. You also know about the Bill of Rights. That's what we're going to try to get you guys. Feel free to take a look at the rest of the learning goal because it's going to be something that we're going to have in class as well. But this is just a way to familiarize yourself with what the goal is for what you guys are going to be learning today. Important vocabulary. This is a slide that you're going to need to write all of the important vocabulary words. We have a total of 6 of them. Our first one, ratification, we talked about in class, which is a formal approval of the Constitution by the ratifying convention held in each state. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying ratification is approval and making it a document official. Fundamental means very important. It's the foundation of something. Preamble means an introduction. An article is a separate part of a document that deals with a single subject. Then the articles are divided into sections. So an article would kind of be like a chapter within a book. And then within that, there are separate parts underneath it called sections. An amendment is a fancy way of saying a change to the Constitution. So if you need to amend something, whether it's in the Constitution or real life, you're changing it. The Constitution has a bunch of amendments, which are a formal title for the changes made to the Constitution. If you need to go back and review any of those words or pause or anything like that, this would be a good time. So as a whole, this should be a review, so you may not have to write this, but if you don't already know it, I would strongly recommend it. A Constitution is a piece of paper that explains the laws of a country and tells what a government and its citizens can and cannot do. It's kind of like a rule book for a country. You could even say that our student code of conduct and our handbook and that kind of thing would be a constitution. The United States Constitution is considered the highest law of the land. Anything that's written in it is a law. So if you break it, or if a president even tries to go against it, then they can get in a lot of trouble. It's the most important thing in our country. It explains the structure of our government, meaning how it's going to be set up, who's going to have power, and who makes decisions and why. It also specifically names the 3 branches of government that we have in the United States and what they do, their powers. You guys remember back to Montesquieu and separation of power, so no one person had too much of it? Well, the Constitution used that idea and set up our government form in 3 separate branches, so they all shared power. That's what our 3 branches are. You're going to need to copy this down as well. Our government is made up of the legislative branch, the executive, and the judicial. When we're talking about the legislative branch, we're talking about Congress. You guys might see it on the news. It's a big room with a bunch of people who talk about stuff. Congress is broken up into 2 parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is made up based on population. So if Texas has more people that live there than Idaho, then Texas will have a lot more representatives in the House of Representatives. What they do is they vote on different things and make decisions. The Senate is made up evenly with 2 people from each state representing them in the Senate, and they all make decisions. Both sides, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, are equal, and they make decisions in the same way as the other. Congress is the first branch that's discussed in the Constitution, and it's the legislative branch. It's made up of the House and the Senate. Their main job is to pass and make laws. The executive branch is the one that you guys know the most about. The person in charge of the executive branch is the President of the United States. A lot of jobs go with the President of the United States. They're Commander-in-Chief of the military, meaning they're the head of the entire military. They're also in charge of making sure that we're getting along well with other countries and the government's running smoothly, as well as a lot of other things. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court, which is also in Washington, D.C., and they head what's called the judicial branch again. So the judicial branch as a whole decides whether laws are constitutional or not. People might be upset about something, they go to court, they don't like the case, they can go all the way up to the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. People who are on the Supreme Court, there are 9 total justices, which is a fancy name for a judge, and once they get picked to be a judge, they get to have that job for the rest of their life. Okay, so here's some background that you guys should already remember and should already know. The Constitution needed 9 out of 13 states to approve it in order for it to become a law, in order for it to happen. There were 2 sides that were arguing about it, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and they tried to convince people that their side was correct. The Federalists really liked the idea of the Constitution, but the problem was the Constitution was only a set of rules and set up for our government. It did not include a Bill of Rights, which made the Anti-Federalists very mad. After a lot of arguing and convincing, the Anti-Federalists finally got the Federalists to agree to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution, and it was eventually passed. Okay, this is something that I'm not going to make you write down as far as everything else that you should have already been writing down, but I do want you to be conscious of where you are and see what you understand as we move along. The Bill of Rights, which we've already talked about, was inspired by the English Bill of Rights a long time ago, and as I already mentioned, while the Federalists didn't think it was necessary, they did agree to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. So the Bill of Rights is technically a part of the Constitution. The rights would be added as amendments, meaning they were seen as official changes or additions. You guys remember that we discussed earlier in this presentation that an amendment is an official change. The Bill of Rights was full of 10 amendments. The Bill of Rights was based on the different constitutions developed by the states. So while the individual states had previous constitutions, a lot of those included different specific rights that people should have. The 10 total amendments were known as the Bill of Rights. So to clarify, you need to be writing down the things that are underlined, and to clarify the point of what the Bill of Rights are, it's pretty much a list of 10 things that we as Americans have the right to do. For example, we have the right to freedom of speech, we have the right to freedom of religion, we have the right to freedom of the press, we have the right to have weapons, we have the right to avoid cruel and unusual punishment, that kind of thing. Okay, like we already discussed, the Constitution itself is considered the fundamental law of the United States, and it was created in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, like many of the other things during that time, in 1789. They argued, they edited, they figured it out, and then they ratified it in 1789. So it was written in 1787, ratified and approved and created and in effect 1789. Before 1789, they were operating under the Articles of Confederation, which you guys remember wasn't too good, which is why they needed to get rid of it. It's really important that you guys write down the structure of the actual Constitution. So make sure you take a moment to pause and write this stuff down in the order. This is the order it's written. It's kind of like Chapter 1, the preamble. As you know, it's an introduction. Chapter 2 is Article 1. Chapter 3, and so on and so on. This is the section by section breakdown of what the Constitution included. Now, some interesting facts about the Constitution. Make sure that you know that it has been amended 27 times, meaning fixed. The beautiful part about the Constitution is it is a living, breathing document, meaning it can always change. So if there's a time period in history where something isn't going well or needs to be changed, then it can be amended. An example would be the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, or the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Prior to that, we did not have those opportunities for those minority groups. And the amendments added the Constitution, making those a law. You can even see the original Constitution and Bill of Rights on display at the National Archives and Records Administration Building in Washington, D.C. Now, the preamble I mentioned before is an introduction, but it's also the most famous part of the Constitution that many of you guys have probably heard before. Preamble states that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It's a really nice, poetic introduction to the Constitution that describes that the point of the Constitution is to form a better country, make sure it's fair, make sure that they're providing peaceful opportunities, and that they're prepared for the defense of the country if we ever need it. So it's a really interesting document, and that's the most famous part. That's it for the slideshow itself. Make sure you have all of the things written down in your Cornell notes, especially the parts that were underlined. bring that to class, and have that ready to review. If you have any questions about this, please post your question on Edmodo or send me an email.